All right, guys, so I think it's time we have to talk about YCS Richmond. There are definitely some things that you need to know about that happened at this event. I personally have some mixed feelings about this event. I think that there were some really great things that happened. There were some powerful cards being played, but then it actually just reinforced a lot of the problems that I was talking about in Friday's video about how Yu-Gi-Oh! Is just simply unfun at times. But that's not the most important thing about today's video. I'm here to bring you up to date on the top cards being played, the top strategies being used, and more importantly, everything you need to know about the event. So let's go ahead and jump on in. In case you guys didn't know, YCS Richmond did happen over the course of the weekend. There were 1,441 players. That actually may sound like a good thing, but for context, YCS events are normally huge Yu-Gi-Oh! Events that bring some of the best players there, and there are so many. 1,400 actually is a lot less than it should be. For context, guys, on the West Coast, one step lower than a YCS would be a regional. LA regionals cap out at about 1,200 people, so not necessarily far off from YCS Richmond. And 2 weeks ago, YCS Indianapolis, another high-level premier event, actually had 500 more players. And that was actually considered a little low because there couldn't have been a top 64 bracket to determine who was the YCS champion, and it had to be 32. A lot of players thought that that was a little unfair. I mean, I want you to imagine to go through 12 rounds of Yu-Gi-Oh! Grueling rounds, where a lot of times you take up to an hour per round, meaning that you're playing 12 hours of Yu-Gi-Oh! Just to find out you got 36th place, and you're not going to be able to have any opportunity to win that YCS, and it's really just because of who you play. Now, you can blame the low attendance on a few things. It is really close to the holidays, but I personally think that it's going to be more correlated to the video that I talked about in my last one regarding price and how every Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck feels the same. Be sure to check out that video if you guys want to hear all of the information for that. But of course, I'm going to be going over some of the most important cards that were played over the event, just in case you want to keep up with competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Or maybe you want to have a leg up on your friends. From what I've observed from YCS Richmond, there were some really powerful cards that may not have been played a lot throughout the last event and over the time in between. A card that I've noticed that has been really powerful throughout the event was Nibiru the Primal Being. This card is amazing at being able to stop your opponent from doing everything that they want, but keep in mind, there are counters in between these cards and players are very well prepared. I also saw cards like Effect Veiler and Infinite Impermanence. It seems like Effect Negation is back so much that Ghost Mourner and Moonlit Chill is also a really good card right now. People came into this event 100% prepared for decks like Rescue Ace. Infinite Impermanence and Effect Veiler are amazing cards to be able to stop Rescue Ace Turbulence from resolving its effect, but also when you combine those effect negation cards with Nibiru the Primal Being, it's really good at being able to stop combo decks, which a lot of people were playing at the event. Of course, from Age of Overlord, there were also the Sinful Spoils engine being played not only in decks like Rescue Ace, but Inferno Bull. And we'll talk about the top decks in the top cut a little bit later, because there were some decks that did a lot better than we expected. I think players are also starting to figure out how the Horus cards work. They're not just level 8 monsters that you summon to use for extra deck plays. They actually have some pretty decent effects on their own and can be really punishing. So it's really encouraging to see those two strategies from Age of Overlord be pretty competitive. Now, normally I'm not a fan of everybody playing the exact same cards, but when there's subtle cards like that, I'm perfectly fine. Especially if there's some really good cards to be able to answer some problematic boards. Cards like Super Polymerization and Dark Ruler No More have been pretty powerful cards that we've seen throughout the event. Those cards were incredibly good for being able to beat those combo decks. I think where things start to break down is that there are some other cards that I think are problematic in one way or another. One being SP Little Knight. We saw that card a whole event long. It almost seemed like if you did not have this card, then you were not playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Whatsoever. I think that it's a really solid card, but the problem with it is its price tag. It's ridiculously expensive, and a lot of players play two, not just one. Yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards like Gozen Match and Summon Limit were on full display. It seemed like if you couldn't play the expensive cards or the really toxic Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards, you really weren't doing much, but there were still some bright spots where we got to see some really fun games, really fun and interactive games. And personally, I'm always a big fan of playing Yu-Gi-Oh! But what I've also noticed is that Yu-Gi-Oh! Games end really quickly when a player can get into a card like Gozen Match or possibly even summon limit, which prevents the opponent from playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Those are never really fun Yu-Gi-Oh! Games. To be honest, I think that's happening a lot more in this Yu-Gi-Oh! Format than any other Yu-Gi-Oh! Format, because cards are not only a lot more accessible, those cards themselves that are a lot more accessible to players are a lot more accessible in your deck, meaning that we're seeing a lot more consistency with some of these instances happening. Of course, let me know what you think about some of these popular cards that are being played over the event. I personally think for the most part, they're fine. Some of them a little annoying, maybe a little bit too expensive and really hard to get. And then others, yeah, it's just they shouldn't have been in Yu-Gi-Oh! In the first place. Let's go ahead and jump into the top cut. I think that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is pretty diverse when it comes to different types of decks. And all of the top 32, 25% was Unchained, 13% Tier Elements, 13% from Simple Spoils, 10% Labyrinth, 9 Pearly, 6 Infernables, 3% goes to Cash Tier, Infernal, Horus Tier Elements, Solomon Great, Manidium, Makanko, and Infernable Knight, Sinful Spoils, Makanko, as well as Dinomorphia. Now, I personally like the top 32, and it's because it challenges my Yu-Gi-Oh! Isn't diverse theory with everybody playing the same cards. I think a really good example of that is Kevin Tien's Makanko list. And Makanko is a deck that has been on the radar since the YCS Indianapolis, and this build pretty much shows you guys that it is still a pretty powerful deck and snagging a top 32. One thing that I do want to point out here is, like we talked about before, cards like Super Polymerization are really powerful. If you are going against a combo deck, I would strongly consider playing these, as it seems to be really good right now. But Makanko is actually a lot better now because of Kin and Jin. Not only are these monsters level 3 warrior monsters that can help you disrupt your opponent or get into more cards, Makanko actually has a game plan going first by making the number 30 Acid Golem and giving it to your opponent. This can be seen as a sort of floodgate, but I gotta give it to him. It is a different way to play Yu-Gi-Oh! And I gotta give it a plus in that book. There was also Solomon Great that ironically did really well. Getting into the top 32, I gotta say, is an incredible feat. I was a little bit defeated to see the deck play floodgates inside of the main board like Gozen match, but I was really inspired by Solomon Greats in the top cut. I actually wanted to play it, and I hope it wasn't just the floodgates that got it there. I think that's actually one of the bigger problems for Yu-Gi-Oh! To be honest. Solomon Great, or some decks that you guys may see, you might think is amazing, and then when you actually see the nitty-gritty, it's just playing brain dead helmet Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards to be able to win the game. And I don't think anybody has any fun winning that way or losing to something that way. Moving on to top 16, the outliers start to get a little bit thinned out. There were 4 Unchained, 2 Sinful Spoils Infernable, 2 Tier Elements, 2 Sinful Spoils Rescue Ace, 2 Pearly, 1 Labyrinth, 1 Horus Tier Element, 1 Infernable, and 1 Infernable Sinful Spoils Makanko. That's a lot. What was really interesting is that in the last YCS, Unchained wasn't this powerful, but in this YCS, Unchained is incredibly good. People thought that Rescue Ace was the best deck in the game, which, to be honest, it's a lot better than what people did give it original credit for. And I think we're gonna have to start looking out for that rock, paper, scissors effect it's going to have on the meta, because Rescue Ace did so well at the last YCS. A lot of people started to drop cards that would be really good against Unchained. Now that Unchained has done really well at this YCS, players are going to start playing those cards that are good against Unchained, but those cards just so happen to be not so good against Rescue Ace. Let's also not forget about the combo and the trap-based Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks that will throw a monkey wrench into the equation, as well as the new cards that we're going to be getting out very soon. I think that the dynamic for Yu-Gi-Oh! Has so many opportunities to change, so I wouldn't say that anything is set in stone right now. Simple economics, my boy. The crazy thing though is that even when players are using those cards to be able to stop the graveyard, it doesn't mean that I don't think that those graveyard reliant decks can't thrive. Let's take a look at Tyler S's Tier Limit deck, and I'm telling you, this man had the riz. I heard Tyler talk about his win in his game and everything in between, and to be honest, I was captivated. Mans was just like, he was gonna win that tournament, and even though he didn't, he won in my heart. That dude's a top dog. I think tier elements have been pretty much solved at this point in time. Tyler didn't play anything drastically different, and the Horus engine was actually back to the original size that it was when we first started playing in Age of Overlord. But it looks like we're starting to see another rock, paper, scissors effect. Super Poly being good against particular decks, and people playing less decks to be affected by Super Poly, which means Super Poly isn't as good, which means player will play the cards less, and then people will just go back to playing Super Poly. Onto the top 8, Unchained dominates at a 50% ratio. There's still a Sinful Spoils Rescue Ace, a Pearly, a Horus Tearlament, and a Sinful Spoils Infernoble. Unfortunately, at this time, my man Jib just so happened to get knocked out of the tournament. And for the people who don't know, Jib is one of the top players in the Yu-Gi-Oh card game in the entire world. He also just so happens to lose to your boy. Now, easily by comparative properties, me and Jib have the exact same number of YCS tops and YCS wins. That makes me one of the best players in the entire game, right? Right? I think that it's really crazy to consider Sinful Spoils Rescue Ace not a good Yu-Gi-Oh deck. While it didn't get to the top 4 bracket, it getting into the top 8 is still crazy. It's still a really powerful Yu-Gi-Oh deck that if players don't respect, meaning that if they respect decks like Unchained and Tearlament, then Rescue Ace can definitely sleek a little bit more wins. But when it comes to balance, the format seems a little bit more fairer than some of the other formats that I may have experienced. On to top 4, it was 2 Unchained, a Sinful Spoils, and a Pearly. First of all, I want to say congratulations to Pack with Infernoble. I did say that that was one of the best decks in the entire game, and my Rogue tier list was actually a crime that I even put it in a Rogue, and it's because this deck is really, really powerful in the Yu-Gi-Oh right now. A lot of players are playing a ton of hand traps to be able to stop your opponent, and Infernoble just so happens to be a deck that's built to be able to play through those particular hand traps and make the board that it wants. Also, coincidentally, it has a lot of flex spots that you can use to be able to stop some of your opponent's most powerful cards, and Pac did a masterclass of that, getting 3rd place at the event with it. Congratulations to you, your deck was awesome. Overall, moving into the top cut, unfortunately, it was Unchained versus Unchained, which is a real f***ing snooze. It was so bad that we didn't even watch the top cut. It's actually going on as I'm recording this video. Let me go ahead and see what happened. Ah, yes, it's game 1. I can tell you what happened before this without seeing it. One of the players were able to go full combo, and the other player could not go full combo. Therefore, the player that did not go full combo immediately lost. The fact that I'm actually going through this and it's exactly what happened, it's kind of bad. There really didn't seem to be anything special or different about these Unchained decks from what I've seen. We did see a lot of Nibiru being played, and I think that's probably one of the top hand traps. I actually can't wait to do a hand trap tier list to update you guys on that particular area. My overall thought on Yu-Gi-Oh so far is that there are some things that are really inspiring, and then there's some other things from a budget perspective that seem way out of control, as well as some Yu-Gi-Oh cards that don't seem really fair to play against. Of course, big dog, if these are your type of videos, go ahead and let me know down below in the comment section. I would be excited to make you guys some more. And of course, if you want to see more TheCaliEffect content, you already know what to do. Be sure to check out these videos, as I'll catch you on the next one.